Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Under the Pine Trees with our special guest, Joan Thompson, who is doing the daunting topic of climate change in a time of pandemic, exploring the role of a prophetic people. And I wanted to make sure I got that title in because originally all they had was she was discussing climate change, which was not quite accurate, but I think it's because they ran out of space when they were posting it. Anyways, I'm going to turn the session over to Joan. Welcome.
Well, thanks everyone for joining. So my name is Joan Thompson. For anyone who doesn't know me, is there anyone here who doesn't know me? I don't think so. Today I wanted to talk about climate change in a time of pandemic, exploring the role of a prophetic people, or is it really pandemic or pandemics in a time of climate change? I know that last year we were getting a lot of traction in the media and other places and getting more and more messages out to people about the urgency of climate change. And then when the pandemic came, there seems to be a sense of, well, we can't deal with climate change right now. We can only deal with the pandemic. However, one of the realities of climate change is that there will be more pandemics and that the normal we came from just 5 years ago or 10 years ago will never be back in our lifetimes. And so I thought it would be really timely to just have this kind of conversation. So for today's session, I'm going to talk for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And I wanted to start with, why I'm the one talking to you about climate change, and then do a very high overview of what we're at. This is not the science about, carbon and things like that, just a really high overview. And then start a discussion of the role of a prophetic people in responding to any crisis. I want to leave you with my three main ideas and then open it up for questions and discussion. Okay? Okay. So I've been interested in climate change and concerned about it for quite some time. I don't know if you remember, but when we first started hearing about it in around 1990, 1980s, all we knew was that the world was going to get warmer and Toronto was going to have a subtropical climate. Did any of you remember that, hearing that? It sounded wonderful. Unfortunately, as more and more scientists do more and more research, the situation gets increasingly more severe. So in 2018, in November, when the Parliament of World Religions was in Toronto, I went to as many climate change sessions as I could. That was the first time that they had a climate change track in the Parliament. And I went to the keynote address, and it was pretty sobering. It was run by a group of scientists. I think it's the Union of Concerned Scientists. But what really struck me was that the people who run the Parliament of World Religions wanted to get this message out to as many faith-based groups as they could about the pivotal role going forward of faith-based groups, because the three main groups of people who can affect climate change are governments, and governments never have any incentive to do anything unless people are going to vote for it. Businesses, and businesses can never go on and do anything unless there's profit for them in it, and educated consumers and citizens. And the role of faith-based groups, they believe, is pivotal in getting that message out there. So Kitchener Congregation embarked on a 6-month or more adventure in trying to learn more about what we could learn about climate change. And we didn't want to read books and discuss the books. We wanted to do something a little more entertaining. So we started a video and discussion group. And we started it with some movies that are available on Netflix and some other W5 episodes and TED Talks and things that were available on Netflix. And we wouldn't necessarily do a whole movie in 1 week. We'd do segments, watch something for 15 or 20 minutes and then talk about it. And that was really helpful. We looked at a number of websites, and I can give you websites if you're interested. And we were starting to get involved in climate strikes and interfacing with other groups about, what we can do in cooperation with other people to actually promote change. And then, of course, the pandemic happened and everything shut down. Last year at World Conference, as we were in the middle of all this, I started speaking with a couple of other people that most of you know. One is Rod Downing, who's the chair of the Canadian Peace and Justice team for the church. And the other is Susan Oxley, who used to be our apostle. And both were very concerned about climate change and getting the message out to church people and congregations and starting dialogue around what we can do. And so we started talking, we attracted a few more people who wanted to be involved. We formed what's now called the North American Climate Justice Team. We've got a website, seaofchristclimatejustice.org. And we had a wonderful in-person colloquy planned for this October at Samish Island Campgrounds, which of course is not now happening. So in the meantime, the website is there and we are doing monthly discussions, Zoom discussions. The first one in July was on nature as refuge and solace. The second one, which we've done for the first time in August and we'll be doing again on August 30th, is exploring the meaning of the sacredness of creation. We're starting with the heart things, the spiritual discipline things, and I'll talk more about that later. Through the winter, there will be more conversations on Zoom, which will start pulling in scientists for more information and action items. And then there is currently a plan to have a full in-person colloquy next October in Samish Island. So that's kind of where I'm at with it and why I'm the one talking to you today. So a really high-level overview of the reality of climate change that we're facing. There's basically 4 possible actions to take in the area of climate disruption. And the first is prevention. And the ship has sailed on that one. It's too late to talk prevention. We're already into it. We're already well past the goal of 350 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. We're already into the early decades of disruptive change. If we were to stop emitting carbon today, it would take 1,000 years for the climate to go back to what it was before 1960. So that's a pretty sobering thought. However, there are steps that we can take to reduce it. It's already getting bad. It doesn't necessarily have to get completely catastrophic. And so what are the steps? Well, in order to reduce the carbon levels, as the scientists say, we've got to basically make everything electric instead of biofuels, which means we've got to make appliances and everything we use more efficient, and we've got to decarbonize the production of electricity. Ontario is doing very well with that. Only 7% of our electricity still comes from coal. Almost all of our electricity comes from nuclear and hydro. But in order to do that, you know, there needs to be activists who are writing their MPs and writing letters to businesses and especially getting together with other groups to form larger and larger groups of people who can say to the politicians and say to the businesses, we demand change. And that's where ecumenical groups and community groups come in. There's also personal consumer choices. And while that's important, that has the least impact and it has the slowest impact. And so while it's important that we're learning about the personal consumer choices we can make, we need to make sure that that's not the only thing we're doing. After mitigation comes adaptation. So while mitigation is where most of the activism is taking place, adaptation is where your government is currently working. You know, these are steps to minimize the impact on our communities. I think I have more stuff here. The number one impact currently being experienced in Canada, especially Eastern Canada, is flooding, which we've all heard about from rising water levels that we're experiencing, but also from permafrost loss. Canada has something like 1/6 of the world's fresh water, but a great deal of it is in northern lakes. And those northern lakes, the land around it is permafrost. And as the permafrost melts, that land erodes and the lakes can just simply collapse and become huge flooding rivers. And the water is lost and the area around is lost. So we're starting to experience that. We're also having rain bombs. I don't know how many of you have heard of them. It's where you get an enormous amount of water coming down in one area in a short period of time. It's happening all over North America. It happened maybe 7 or 8 years ago in Burlington, where 4,500 homes were flooded in the space of an hour. It did not rain in Hamilton. It did not rain in Toronto. But in Burlington, huge amount of water came down. So the insurance industry, you always follow the money. The insurance industries are paying attention, and our building codes in Canada are all being rewritten at the moment. Building codes for residential and commercial. They've looked at, you know, water first. They're also looking at wind, and they're looking at heat. They're also in the process, most communities, of redoing the infrastructure like storm sewer drains that are not large enough to accommodate the amounts of water we're getting. So I could go on with that, and this is supposed to be an overview, so I'll quit that. So more wind events, more extreme heat, and a lot of things come with extreme heat. For some countries, it's predicted that the countries, especially around the equator, may become uninhabitable by the end of this century or sooner. But we all have things that happen with extreme heat, including the migration of species, the migration of birds, the migration of animals, the migration of humans, and along with that always goes the migration of viruses. So whereas it used to be a prediction that there would be a pandemic every 100 years, we have actually had 3 in the last 30 years. If you look at SARS, if you look at Ebola, if you look at swine flu, and now we've got COVID-19. As pandemics go, this is a very minor pandemic. It's affecting the whole world. It's affecting our economies, but the mortality rate is actually very low. It's not like the measles pandemic in North America that wiped out 95% of the indigenous population. It's not like the bubonic plague. It's not like the Spanish flu, where between 50 and 100 million people died. That's not to say that the next pandemic could not be like that. It's also not to say that this pandemic could not yet mutate. The Spanish flu, there were actually 2 strains of it. The first strain made people sick but didn't kill them. A year later, it was the second strain that killed people. So the reality is that we will probably be facing more pandemics and localized epidemics with increasing frequency as time goes on. And the last one is humanitarian, and this one is getting the least amount of action currently. There are currently somewhere between 70 to 80 million refugees on this planet. Many of them have been homeless for generations, and the number is increasing rapidly. The United Nations estimates somewhere around an additional 100 million refugees in the next 30 years. At a time when countries are less willing to take refugees. But the stories that are coming out of hotter countries are already horrific. Crop failures year after year after year, increased disease from working in the sugarcane fields without adequate hydration in extreme hot heat, things like that. We're only beginning to see now in the pandemic the possibility of food chain failures and seeing the possibility of just how bad this could get. So there's a great need for humanitarian action. There's a great need for political activism around humanitarian action. So talk about. So that's a pretty high level, fast overview. So let's talk for a few minutes about becoming and being a prophetic people. So I thought about what the most frequent responses to the enormity of climate change are, and this is what I came up with. You may agree or disagree, but I think the major response is just simply overwhelm and hopelessness. It's just too big and too complex, and there's too many battles to fight, and it just sounds so hopeless. And I think that's, one of the most pervasive and common responses. A second response is, well, we've got to get going and we've got to get going fast. So let's jump in and fix the first thing we see that we can do and focus on that. And that's, in many ways better than the first response in that you're doing something. But it may be not doing the most effective thing, or it may not be doing what you're really called to. And so it can distract people from really getting to the root of what to do. And then there's what I call the pulling a Scarlet O'Hara. I just can't think about that today. I'll think about that another day. And I'll just go on with my life and ignore it. So what would be different for a prophetic people? When I think about the prophetic process, if I had to sum the whole thing up for everything I've learned this past year in seminary, I would sum it up with this song that we all know from Campfire, Spirit of the Living God, fall afresh on me. This fourth step, melt me. You can't be melted unless you're willing to be open, to be changed and transformed. And so that's the very first step of the prophetic process, is opening your heart to transformation. Mold me is the step of, now that your heart's open, saying, I will respond to how I see the Spirit moving and how I feel I'm being directed rather than I'm being in control. And then fill me is the path of the disciple, moves both inward and outward, going deep into discernment and prayer. And then the fourth is fill me for action. So how do we actually do that? Well, some of you may have watched this past week the third session of the European Peace Colloquy. If not, it will be posted on the eCamping site as soon as it's ready. And a great deal of that, Zach Herman McLaughlin was talking about the pastoral spiral. I know Susan already bought the book. And so I just wanted to reinforce this pastoral spiral. It's an excellent process that really is talking about becoming a prophetic people. And there's multiple stages in it, and I won't repeat here what Zach covers so well in the Peace Colloquy session, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the steps. Prophets become very aware of the issues and realities of their day, not looking toward the past, not dwelling in the future, but what is it that's happening now, and how do we become better educated and better knowledgeable about it? Prophets open their hearts and pay attention to find passion. As people start becoming more aware and learning more and reading more and watching more educational videos and things, some passion can begin to emerge. And it's important to pay attention to where that passion is developing and taking you. People spend consistent time in discernment activities. The church has some excellent discernment resources, both on the spiritual formation page and on the guiding principle page. And discernment is both personal and group. It needs to be a combination of both. And so the community aspect of discernment is important. One of the sessions I was on with Susan a week or two ago, she mentioned the question about how does the congregation get started? And it may be that in this time of Zoom, after eCamping is over, because people are really busy with eCamping right now, but possibly in the fall while we're still social distancing, we could start some Zoom discernment and discussion groups where we could each do a certain amount at home and then come and discuss it during the week. So I'd like to just leave that thought in your mind. And prophets maintain hope and trust in God's movement, recognizing that it's not up to us to fix the world. We have a part to play. If we all play the part that the Spirit leads us to, then there will be a broad base of things being done. We can't all respond to the same thing, and so we need to maintain that hope and trust that so long as we're responding to the Spirit's movement, all will be well in one way or another. And our prophetic people use all elements in dialogue together. So because you can do so much more in community than you can do as an individual person. So I know that's a lot, and I probably talked longer than I should have, but I did want to leave you with just 3 thoughts that I think are really important. There's a lot of serious issues facing our world today: economic issues, racism issues, nationalism issues. I mean, you name it, this whole gamut, poverty issues. The thing about climate change is that it will increasingly continue to make every single other issue worse. And so there's no person on this planet who's not going to suffer in one way or another because of it. And the poor, of course, will be are being and will continue to be disproportionately affected. So because of that, it's the one issue that the Parliament of World Religions is asking every faith group to teach and preach and continually keep before them. Human nature is that we will only fight for and we will only consistently do that which we love and cherish. I have a small sketch about this that I came across years ago, and I just loved it. So if you don't mind, just take a minute and imagine, those of you who are old enough to remember what a balance beam is from gym class in school. Imagine that I offered you $10 to walk across a balance beam. Would you do it? Maybe, maybe not. $10 isn't very much motivation. It's good enough for Kathy. And if you have reasonable balance, then why not, right? Now imagine that same balance beam is stretched between the roofs of 2 40-story buildings. If I offered you $100,000 to walk across that balance beam, who would do it? Now imagine that that balance beam is on the same, between those 2 40-story buildings. But on the roof of the other building is your 10-month-old child all along on the roof crawling around. How long would it take you to decide to go across that balance beam? You will fight for what you love and what you cherish. It's not about money. For money, you'll only do what's convenient. That's human nature. But when you love and cherish something, that's when you'll fight for it. And that's why with the climate justice team, we're starting with the opening the heart issues. Something happened to my screen. Okay. And the last one is, we're starting to hear a lot about the difference between transactional and transformational activities and processes in leadership. Transactional maintains the status quo typically. Transformational is where prophetic people go. Prophetic people are never centered in maintaining the status quo. They're always envisioning God's better future and always looking for transformation rather than transaction. So that's everything I wanted to say. I'll stop sharing and open it up for any questions or discussions or dialogue.
Joan, it's Kathy. Do you know how we have done with the pandemic and the climate?
I would check that out today. One of the really good sites to go to is NOAA, N-O-A-A. That's the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. And they have a site called climate.gov. They have a lot of climate things as well. But last year in May, the parts per million carbon were at 415. This year in May, they're at 417. So it's actually continued to gone up. It probably has not gone up as much as it would have without the pandemic. But the reality is, if we all stopped emitting carbon today, which the only reason way we could do that would be if we were all dead. But if we all stopped emitting carbon today, it would still take 1,000 years for what we've already done to go back to under 350. So from 417 to 350. So there's no going backwards in our lifetime, no matter what we do. There's no going back in our lifetime, and we will never again see the climate we had in 1980. It's gone.
Wow. Sobering.
I like the picture.
Thanks. Joan, do you anticipate seeing motions or resolutions on this topic at future world conferences? And if so, what do you have a sense as to what those motions might attempt to accomplish?
Yes and no. This past conference, I don't know how many people are aware of it, but rather than try to get something on the conference floor, what Rod Downing did was he presented a motion to the Quorum of High Priests, which the Quorum of High Priests approved, which went directly to the First Presidency, and requested the First Presidency to make available to the church by the next conference information on the IPCC report that came out in 2018, and suggestions for congregational and personal responses. So rather than trying to go to the conference floor, I see more of this kind of bypassing. I suspect that the conference will be preoccupied with the question of nonviolence for at least the next conference and maybe the one after. But I was just fascinated by the way to bypass the conference and just get things from one of the quorums directly to the First Presidency.
Just to get the process started before the pandemic shut everything down, we started, instead as well as the peacetime, we started a sacredness of creation time in our congregation. And Dennis wrote a song, "We Belong to the World," just to stress the interconnectedness of everything. And it's available on YouTube, by the way. And plug. And we also have a lot of youth and kids, and they were assigned to come up with something for sacredness of creation. It was really interesting. It got them involved. So I'm anxious to get back and get this going again.
Is there a way to get that going online via Zoom in the meantime?
I don't know. We have tried connecting our congregation, but it hasn't. There's a lot of people aren't very interested.
Dorothy, what congregation are you in?
Guelph.
Guelph. Oh, yes, I knew that.
Joan, will there be anything at the CEM conference that will be presented to congregations? As Dorothy mentioned, not many on my congregation, well, they work during the day, and I don't know how much are watching in the evening, but I don't think a lot of people are comfortable or have the technology at the moment to do Zoom. But as we open up, we can be talking more in our congregations. but is there something coming up at the CEM conference to discuss this?
Hadn't even thought about it, but I'll talk about it with Carrie.
As Alex Catava told me years ago, well, Dorothy, do it. So Joan, do it. Or Susan or whoever.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dorothy. I'm thinking that we don't have to wait for congregations to open to be able to do something. Or, you know, if we have people that are interested and you spread the word, then you can make a gathering.
We've got lots of Zoom, what's the word, accounts. And they're paid for 7 by 24. And, you know, if 3 people want to have a discussion group or a discernment group or a book study group or a knitting group or a crocheting group, there's no reason we couldn't be doing a lot more of it. Once the busyness of eCamping is over, I know that many people are just overwhelmed by trying to keep up with all the wonderful activities of eCamping. I'd like to be part of the eating group. I just haven't figured out how to do that on Zoom.
Actually, they did that. That was a dinner gathering and a pancake and a dessert. We had a whole meal.
How did it go? How did the dinner one go?
I wasn't at the dinner one, but I was at the breakfast one and the dessert one, if that says something about me. But
A wonderful, hopeful book is a great big book called Drawdown, and it's edited by Paul Hawken, and it says the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And it's really, really interesting, the things that are already being done on a small scale throughout the world. And if we could only adopt this on a big scale, that would be really great.
There's just an explosion of scientists and entrepreneurs and innovators that have been, you know, studying and researching and creating. All it really takes now is for the political will to make the economic shifts.
So during the pandemic, I've been online quite a bit. One of the things I signed up for, which is free right now, is Idea City. And they're like TED Talks. And I just watched one yesterday that was on the fuel cell. Fuel cell is power without using creation. It's using hydrogen, but it sounds like a really clean source of fuel for hydro, like for electricity, for cars, this kind of thing, worldwide. So it gives third world countries affordable electricity and this kind of thing. It was pretty amazing. And they've been talking about it for years, but now it's getting serious. You know, like you're saying, the statistics are shocking. And so that was kind of interesting. One of the things I've kind of concentrated on, one of my new passions is decluttering my home, decluttering my mind, slowing down and being more open. I feel that I do have a more open heart to things that are really important that I didn't have room for before because I was so cluttered. And so that has been kind of a great project. I'm still working at it. It's going to take a while to declutter the house, but I'm getting there. At least I'm making an effort. So at some point, I will always have room for the Zoom meetings that I feel are part of my passion and steering me in the right direction.
I hadn't really kind of put climate change together with all the other social issues that it impacts it. And this morning I was thinking about our 2020 guiding question from Steve Veazey, moving towards the peaceful one. And I'd sent off an email to Lou, whose class is tonight, the what now? And this is causing me to think some more, like I haven't got it all figured out, but that's part of this 2020 question. Climate change, it's got to be kind of, if you're looking at it as a hierarchy, because it affects everything else, the trickle down, and so it'll be interesting, and I'm looking forward to the next Zoom on the peaceable kingdom. I think Ron Harmon's talking. Yes, so yeah, that's making me think in a different way now, Joan. Thank you for all that information. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I do not envision that every congregation is going to get involved in working towards solutions to climate change. I don't envision that because I think that if every congregation goes through a discernment process, we'll all be led in different directions. And that it would be overkill if we were all led in the same direction. I remember years ago being at a women's retreat where Charmaine Chevalier-Smith, and I've asked her, she can't find the quote, but she was quoting, she thinks, one of the saints who talked about in prayer, praying that praying that God would direct you to the need that you need to pray for. And so if there's 6 of us here and you tell me you have a need and it's not something I feel led to pray for, I can confidently go on to who I do feel led to pray for, trusting that someone else will be led to pray for you. And I think it's the same thing about climate change and the trust, that if we're all discerning and if we're all paying attention to what's happening in the world and getting reasonably educated about it, then we'll all be led to different things. And that's okay, that's good. That's the way it should be.
I've been very much led in the same way, same direction, Joan. It's Kathy. That we've all been called to do our part, and what we've been called to, we need to do that. That's very important.
Yes, isn't that unity and diversity?
Any other burning questions or things people want to share around this whole topic?
Joan, can you, I don't know how to say this. First of all, thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared, because I actually thought this was an incredible discussion and topic. So much to digest. I did feel at some point feeling almost a sense of despair about, where we are in the world right now. And so I just wanted to ask if you can say something to maybe give us a little bit of hope for the future. I know that's a lot to put on you, but I'm trying to think of, like, what can we feel hopeful about?
I think there's a lot to feel hopeful about, but it requires a transformation. Most of us do not remember what it was like to go through World War II. We don't remember what it was like to go through the Great Depression. We don't remember what it was like to go through the Spanish flu pandemic. We've heard stories, but our reality has been this very cushy, artificial lifestyle for most of our lives. And we're starting to wake up to the fact that that's not sustainable and that it's all going to change. And so for me, I need that reframing in order to refine my hope, to understand that people have had happy, productive lives for centuries and for millennia without going to Tim Hortons for coffee every morning, without ordering pizza, without being able to get in the car and drive wherever they want to go and fly south for the winter. And so where I find my hope is in understanding that our lifestyle has gotten out of balance and it's now being pushed back into balance, and we're refinding that balance. And for most of us, that is not going to kill us. For most of us, we will find that our lifestyle, once we've been through the next 5 years or so, is actually a happier one, a more peaceful one, that our relationships are better, that our stress level is down. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for in something, in terms of going hope, but we're being nudged in a different direction and we're being pushed in a different direction. There are a lot of people who will not survive climate change. But then none of us were going to live forever on this earth anyway. And I don't say that facetiously. What I'm saying is the planet itself, Mother Nature itself, has these wonderful biofeedback loops. And when any one species becomes too dominant, a number of biofeedback loops come into play that get that balance back. We have become too dominant. And whether we like it or not, Mother Nature is going through these biofeedback loops to get us back into balance. And and again, I don't know if I'm saying this right, David, or if this helps. We've spent so many years in a culture that tries to deny death, that tries to postpone death. And we've lost that sense of balance of saying death is a part of life and we celebrate every day that we have. And we trust to a loving God for what comes after. And instead, we've got this drive that we've just got to, save every person from dying today that we possibly can. So I don't know if that gives you hope or if that actually makes you more anxious about it all. But I think that the grounding, the faith grounding in the understanding of the balance and the cycles of life and the cycles of nature and getting back into harmony with it will actually be a blessing for humanity in the long run. And I think that while the next years may be uncomfortable and challenging, in the long run, it'll actually move us closer towards the peaceable kingdom of God on earth.
Thank you, Joan. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. That wasn't a light hope message.
Well, I see a hope because I see so many people biking and walking I never saw before. And that will reduce the carbon imprint that we're making on our society with all the walking and biking and the time that families are spending together just outside.
It's going to be interesting to see how we continue to creatively make our community life better as the summer comes to an end and we start going back indoors more. I wonder if more people will do outdoor winter activities this year. Discover the wonders of the outdoor Canadian winter.
That would be exciting, but it won't be me.
Well, I've often said it wouldn't be me either. Last winter, we do Airbnb. We're not doing it while the pandemic, but last winter we had a couple who grew up in Kitchener and lived in Kitchener and moved up north, Elliott Lake or someplace up there, and discovered the joys of the Canadian winter. But you have to have the right equipment and the right clothing and the right trails in order to be able to do it. But they've just loved it up there. She hated winter down here, but loves it up there. And I'm thinking, I'd have to be forced to do it before I'd try it, but I may be this winter. So how many of you, were any of you, aside from Susan, on Zach's Peace Colloquy session this past week where he talked about the pastoral spiral?
Yeah, I was.
I missed it. I'll watch it though.
Yeah, I'd really encourage you to, he was talking about more from the aspect of racism, which is certainly an enormous issue, especially in the United States, but really everywhere. And of course, it's also one of the issues that climate change will make worse because as resources get scarcer in countries, as supply chains break down, more and more countries will be more protective of their resources and less willing to let immigrants of any kind in. And racism is one of the key political tools that are used to justify minimizing immigration.
Yes, I appreciated what Zach had said. He shared twice recently. One was on the Canada West mission retreat for 5 days, and then the last European Peace Colloquy, he was the speaker. So hopefully both of those. And he did talk about the spiral from the book Social Analysis in the 21st Century.
Yeah, Ron Harmon shared the same thing during family camp for the California thing. Yeah.
It was one of the books we had to read for seminary. And actually, it was one of the more useful ones. One of the other concepts that I found really fascinating this year in seminary, might have been in her book, Superman's book, I don't know, was the concept that in order for transformation to happen, you have to start by delinking from the normal, traditional experience. And we're certainly in a delinking time. And it's kind of like, you know, before the caterpillar can become the butterfly, it's got to delink from being the caterpillar and be willing to go into that cocoon and give up every notion of what normal is, even though it doesn't know where it's going yet. I have another book here that I haven't read yet that is a seminary book called How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going. And it's really talking about the time we're in and the fact that nobody knows where we're going. We're just trusting the Spirit.
Yes, during the reunion out west, Katie shared a lot when Zach for their class, and Katie recommended that book. Would the book, I've only just begun the social analysis, would that be a good book for a book study, do you think? Like I'm trying to suggest one for the fall. We did book study on Zoom last year, and I think it's going to be on Zoom again.
It's hard for me to answer that because we did a book a week in seminary. And so you're going through each book fast. The social analysis, if I remember right, the most significant stuff was in chapter 5. And I don't know if the whole book, would be of interest to most congregations. A lot of the books, that we do in seminary, there's 1 or 2 chapters that are key. And so if somebody went through it first and said, okay, read this and this and this and this. And, if you could do some book sharing, because it gets expensive to have to everybody buy, copies of the books. I think that might be helpful.
Also, buying all those books, even though I love buying books, are not great for the trees.
I love buying the Kindle because as I keep reading, I'm forgetting the definition of words. So with Kindle, I click on a word, the dictionary opens up, I copy, then I go back and I make a note, and then I can see all my notes. So I love Kindle for that reason. And you don't have to worry about the paper. But yeah, we're just trying to figure out. Katie led one on spiritual formation, and that's by Henry Newen, and I'm wondering if that might be a good book study. We're just trying to figure out what would be a good book for studying. So if anybody has any suggestions, I would love to hear.
The spiritual formation, on the spiritual formation page, I think you've mentioned you've seen it before, Susan, and I know Ruth has. But on the spiritual formation page of the website, there is a book on, I think it's a 6-session book on spiritual discernment. So I thought that would be a great thing to do in the fall as a congregation or as, a group of people in CEM.
And what book would that be, Joan? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
It's on the spiritual formation page, and I forget, I think it's called Discerning God's Will Together. Is that what it's called? I'll look it up and send it to you because I've got it printed out somewhere here, but it's been several months since I've looked at it.
Well, if you're going to do
lots of possibilities.
If you're going to do a book study, please let me know.
Well, I may not be doing it because I have to go back to seminary in October. So everything I'm doing is before the end of October. So anyway, it's 4 o'clock and our time is up. So I want to thank you everyone for participating in this discussion today, and look forward to further discussions in the future.
Thank you, Joan. That was a great topic.
It was great, Joan.
Yes, thank you very much, Joan. And please join us tomorrow for John Hamer, who is going to be talking about the John Whittimer Historical Society. So goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Joan.